It's almost past.
Yes, we are just waiting for the to cross from the live committee that they...
We're not getting in.
Welcome to Parliament TV for our coverage of the second day of the State of the Nation Address debate, live from the historic Cape Town City Hall. Good morning, and I am Shislamari Songobeni.
Good morning to our viewers at home. I am Dr. Sibulelo Mvulane. Today, the State of the Nation address debate will be resuming at 2 p.m. this afternoon. This morning, we will be speaking to some of the members and ministers who participated in the debate yesterday in order to unpack and to interrogate, of course, the issues raised in the debate yesterday.
With the backdrop of the 30 years of democracy and the 7th general election this year, it was no surprise that members were divided along party lines in their portrayal of the picture of South Africa and its progress or lack thereof over the past or the last 30 years. The President's analogy of Dintswalo was very topical during the debate,
Indeed.
with many of the opposition parties taking the opportunity to highlight the challenges faced by Dintswalo.
Indeed, with the end of the 6th administration coming to an end and the 7th general election looming, the debate has given all parties an opportunity to speak directly to the electorate through their speeches. This morning's newspapers are a reflection of the robustness of the debate held yesterday, and today we expect more of the same.
Indeed, a lot more is expected this afternoon. We saw yesterday different political parties raising what they think should have gone into the president's speech, some rubbishing the numbers that the president was giving in terms of the number of people arrested in relation to the state capture, people arrested in relation to crossing the borders into our country illegally, people arrested in relation to possession of drugs and so on. So we expect a lot more later on this afternoon. What stood out for you in the debate yesterday?
I think this was obviously always going to be remembered as probably one of the most to the 6th administration, which also marks the 30th year of our constitutional democracy. For me, what stands out over and above everything that has come to the fore through the debates, it's the fact that we have this progressive constitution. We have obviously passed a number of key legislation to take the country forward. So what is required right now as we navigate our way forward as a country and to rebuild this country, it's the issue of capabilities. It's the importance of ensuring that as government reflects on its shortcomings, over and above obviously highlighting where things have been done correctly and what we can celebrate about our constitutional democracy, it's the importance of building state capability, but not only that, deepening democracy and social compacting as well, and getting more South Africans involved in the conversation, but particularly not only in the conversation, in the work of building this constitutional democracy going forward.
Talking of state capability, the members of the ruling party who were debating yesterday didn't pull back. They brought the minister responsible for electricity, which is quite a contentious issue currently
Indeed.
in the country. They brought the minister responsible for human settlement and many other ministers.
Indeed, the Minister for Human Settlements, as you know, Shitla was in conversation with us yesterday as well, talking to us about the number of houses that have been delivered in the last 30 years of our democracy. And we're looking at a total number of 4.8 million houses, RDP houses, that have been built over the last 30 years of our democracy. And of course, she also reflected on the fact that we have got so many people coming from rural areas, and without even touching on the fact that South Africa is probably one of the most advanced economies on the African continent, which means people who are looking for opportunities on the Africa to South Africa, which also is a challenge for us. So the issue of the informal settlements, obviously, she touched on as well about the interventions that they are putting in place to ensure that they incrementally and systemically begin to address that issue. But also highlighting, again, this is also something that you touched on, that when we were reflecting on what Prof. Maluleke was talking about, progress, that as much as we're making progress within the context of progress, there will also be negativities as well, that we have to, that is the contradiction of growth and development. There will always be some challenges that you'll have to navigate and work around. And of course, the fact that many of our our people are able to now move from specific areas, from the rural areas and go to any part of the country where they wish to go. That also, it's a good thing in many ways because they can exercise their freedom of movement, but at the same time it can also cause problems with urbanization and the resources that are available within that particular district, locality or metro. But with that said, I mean, of course, if we're talking about, broadly speaking, the trajectory of transformation of our constitutional democracy, a lot of laws have been put in place to give expression to the country, to begin to build, to guide our approach in going forward to build the South Africa as envisioned, particularly not only in the Constitution, but of course now in the National Development Plan.
And we had members of the opposition hitting so hard at the ruling party. The leader of the opposition, Mr. John Steenhuisen, painting a picture, an alternative picture, according to him, of Etinzwalo that the president was describing. We saw Honorable Zungula and many other members of the opposition trying to paint an alternative picture. What do you think should be takeaways for the government going forward with only a few months left before the end of this term?
Well, for me, I would still maintain that in going forward, obviously, the President has set the tone with regards to focusing the debate on the 30 years of our democracy. And inadvertently, everybody had to respond to what was contained in the President's speech. And it is really the progress, it is around the progress that has been made in the last 30 years. And within that context of assessing progress, you also have to think about the challenges that still remain. And for me, my takeaway is it's the issue of capability, once again. How do we construct capability? And capability sits within society, it's people within society, it sits within institutions, it's with individuals, it's within organizations as well. But it's about a government ensuring that it begins to harness that capability to ensure that we pair, that we link up the appropriate and the correct capabilities at the right levels of our or spheres of our government to be able to then address and to implement, to address challenges as they arise, but importantly to implement these progressive wide range of policies that we have at our disposal to take the country forward.
Implementation being the
key word.
With the debate going ahead at 2 p.m., the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address, we are looking forward to hearing more from different political parties. I see on the order paper, or rather on the speakers list, there are premiers as well up to debate this afternoon. So stay tuned to Parliament TV and follow us on our social media. Parliament of RSA will be right back shortly.
The President has detailed the undertaking from 2023 SONA. The progress is inspiring. I repeat, the progress is inspiring, alongside with many challenges that we have outlined. Notwithstanding 2 years of COVID-19, this government has done all what it could do. The President gave an honest, balanced reflection of where we stand as a nation. The choice we face as the nation in this year's election is to reaffirm what we said we're going to do in 1994, implementation of a national program of transformation that will result to qualitatively changing the lives of the majority of our people who are black in general and women in particular, because they are in the majority. For the better, and not to side with those who benefited from the historical legacy of the privilege, who seek to block the transformation at every turn, as they cling to preserve their wealth, their properties, as well as positions at the expense of the majority. Under the ANC, we will continue to take the country forward with all its challenges towards a better future for all. Under a conglomeration of opposition parties, they will entrench wealth amongst the few. Under them, poverty and inequality will grow. On Thursday evening, the President accounted to the nation on the implementation not only on SONA 2023 commitments, but also on the 5-year plan, the medium-term strategic framework. To those who say nothing has been done, let me remind you, because we have political dementia.
Welcome back. You are still watching Parliament TV, and we are coming to you live from the Cape Town City Hall, where the debate on the State of the Nation address has just entered the second day. And I am now joined via Zoom by the President of the African Transformation Movement, Mr. Vuyelwethu Zungula. Honorable Zungula, please welcome and thank you for joining us. And please correct me on pronouncing your surname there.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's pronounced Zungula.
Zungula, okay. Thank you very much. Members of Parliament, particularly those of the ruling party, opened the debate yesterday and said the President's speech was a true reflection and an honest assessment of the past 5 years and the 30 years of democracy. But you stood up and said things are worse off in South Africa compared to the way they were in 2019. What do you mean?
Firstly, a SONA is a yearly address. Therefore, if we're to look at maybe the indicators, we should be comparing last year versus this year, because every year there's a SONA whereby the President has to go into account. However, because this SONA happens, is the last SONA of the 6th administration, hence we were focusing on 2019, which is the start of the 6th administration. Now, the incorrect, in fact, mischievous assertion by the President in talking about the 30 years of democracy, it is to conveniently avoid talking about the time he has been in office, because it is a presidential, SONA is a presidential address whereby he should have been accounting on his performance as a president, not talk about the 30 years, because in that 30 years, we've had 4 other presidents besides him. So in our view, he was mischievous in terms of talking about the 30 years instead of focusing on his own performance, because if you're to focus on the indicators on his performance, if we focus, for example, on poverty, when he took over as a president, there was 13 million people that were in poverty. Now we are sitting at 18 million people that are in poverty, meaning there's been an increase of 5 million people. When he took over, 57 people were killed on a daily basis. Now we're talking about 75 people that are killed on a daily basis. When he took over again, the food basket price was around 3,000, and now we're sitting at an amount that is above 5.7. If you look at also the repo rate, when he took over, it was about 5%. In fact, it was 4%. Now it is about 6.25%. Therefore, if you look at all of the indicators that paint to the lived realities of the people, you can see that the country has gone from bad to worse under his leadership. However, we as a party, we decided we are not going to focus on what we know is wrong, because everywhere you go to any township, any suburb, any community, people will tell you exactly what is wrong in our country. Hence, our speech decided to focus on the solutions, because we need to focus our politics on the solutions, because it is the solutions to the problems that will make South Africa a better place.
But one would argue that the President did respond to the challenges, and he did refer to a report on what he promised last year. For instance, he mentioned that there are 10,000 police officers that were recruited in the past year to fight crime. He announced the increase in the number of people who are receiving social grants. Are those not some of the interventions that we expect?
Yeah, definitely. Interventions will be there, and people need to understand that we as ATM, we do recognize that there have been, strides that are taken. There are progresses that could be taken. However, we cannot be praising a fish for swimming. We can't be praising a postman for delivering post, because that's how things are supposed to be in any case. We need to focus on changing what is currently and troublesome to the people. That is why we focus on the current issues that are making the lives of South Africans to be unbearable. Because if you focus on those things, then we channel the energy of the government to resolve those issues, instead of wanting to praise a fish for swimming, and then after we conveniently, look away from the lived realities of the people and not address the problems that are faced by the people. So to answer your question, whilst we agree that there has been interventions that have been made, but if you look at the broader, bigger picture, South Africans are much happy as compared to how they were in 2019. Because in 2019, if you're to look at, for example, the issue of load shedding, there was only 35 days of load shedding in 2019. In 2023, there were 335 days of load shedding. So all of those indicators that we were highlighting are painting a picture of the lived realities of the people. That is why, as a government that is focusing on improving the material conditions of the people, the indicators they need to focus on, it is such indicators.
You touched on the issue of foreigners and illegal foreigners at it dominating the township economy, and saying the government should do something about that. But also you have a new phenomenon of big retailers who seem to be taking over even spaza shops at a township level. What do you think should be the solution? Is it kicking out illegal foreigners who are selling expired foods and making space for big corporations to take over?
Yeah. Look, let's talk about the phenomenon of illegal immigration. Any government, whenever that you've got to deal with unemployment, education, provision of healthcare services, you need to have that understanding that these are the amount of people that you have, because the basis for you to plan how many police stations, how many clinics, how many schools need to be there, it is based on exactly that, the citizens. Now, once you've got illegal immigration that is happening in millions in South Africa, then it makes governance to be nearly impossible, because government is unable to plan, including on the issues of water and sanitation, basic service delivery. Now, on the question now of the township economy, you've got an anomaly in South Africa whereby you've got a sector which is the township and the village and sometimes the inner city economy, whereby almost 100% of all economic activities are not done by the native South Africans, which is an anomaly because it does not happen anywhere in the world. Go to any country, it does not happen. So our proposal as the ATM is that, number one, government needs to be very vigorous on the question of migration, because the people that must come to the country, they must come through legal means, because even South Africans, when they go to other countries, they go to those countries legally. And South Africa needs to deal decisively with illegal immigration, because that is how you are going to send a message that illegal immigration or committing of any crimes is going to be dealt with. Now, the solution there lies that now the government needs to restore the township economy to citizens, because it is citizens that need to dominate all the sectors of the economy. That's the first point. The second point is that the government needs to protect that space even from big retailers, because if you are going to have pick and pay going in the township economy, then it's going to make citizens even poorer, because it will make the people that were predominantly active in that space not able to, to be active economically, because these big retailers are going now to take over that space. You'll recall that when we were growing up, there used to be spazas or general dealers or all forms of economic activities in the townships done by various people. Whereas now, the economic activity, if it's not done by foreigners, it is also done by big retailers. And the end result of that, it is the poverty and the economic displacement of citizens. So that is why we are saying as a party that the government needs to make sure that whoever that is trading in the economy, in the township economy, must be compliant with the respective laws of our country, because the laws are very clear. If you are coming from another country wanting to trade, firstly, you need to be legal in the country. You need to have a business visa. You need to invest 5 million to trade. You need to employ 80% of your staff to be South African. Your business needs to be registered for tax. So that is what the government needs to ensure. But predominantly, we want, as the ATM, that the native citizens of this country be the dominant players of all economic activities, whether it's in the townships, it's in the retail sector, it is in the mass sector, but all economic activities must be dominated by citizens.
You also cited rand manipulation by banks and big corporations. Is there enough evidence to take the banks and these corporations on?
Definitely, definitely there's enough evidence if you look at that report of the Competition Commission. Now, the point of departure here is that this needs to be characterized for what it is. It is economic treason. Rand manipulation is economic treason if you look at the impact that it has had on the lives of citizens. Because once you've got a bank or the banking sector that is going to manipulate the rand, the end result of that is that you are going to make South Africans to be poorer, you're going to make lives to be unbearable, because South Africans are going to struggle paying their debts because of high interest rates. We know that other people, they lost their cars, they lost their homes, even some took their lives, all because of being unable to pay the respective debts. So our view as a party is that there needs to be a commission of inquiry that will thoroughly and transparently investigate all of the conduct of the banking sector. And if we had a state capture commission in the previous years whereby the government was under scrutiny, the same thing would happen to the banking sector, because the banking sector is central to everything that we do, because everything that we do, whether we are, you are just an employee, you are a business, you want to, anything that you have or you are as a citizen, it revolves around banking. So that is why we need to satisfy ourselves that the banking industry is not this almighty and powerful industry that cannot be held accountable. And now that the Competition Commission has found that there has been irregularities, those banks must be held accountable. But there must be further investigation, because there has been reports of unethical practices done by the banks whereby white citizens are charged slightly lower rates and black citizens are charged very higher rates. We know what is happening whereby if you want a loan as a black person to start a business, you are unlikely to get it. But for the same amount, if you want a car, you are most likely to get it. So those are the practices that need to be investigated, so that you do not have any sector in our society that is, number one, above the law, number two, operating in a manner that is ruining the lives of South Africans.
Lastly, before I let you go, Mr. Zungula, you also touched on a very important issue here, and you were calling for the recognition of Amahlubi. And I want you to expand on that, especially in relation to issues of land ownership in South Africa and the rural economy. Why is it so important that the Amahlubi must be recognized?
Amahlubi, okay. Amahlubi are very, very important, just like all nations that we have in our country. Now, what apartheid did and colonialism did is that they castrated many of our kingdoms. That is why a kingdom that used to have a king under the the colonization and the apartheid, some of those kingdoms were actually castrated and they used to be referred to as chiefs or as inkos, which is something that is an anomaly. Our view now as a party is that Amahlubi, particularly because the first political prisoner was actually Ingonyama Balele, who fought colonialism and fought against the land dispossession, fought against everything that the colonizers tried to do wrong in our country. Therefore, it is unheard of that now a government of Africans, a government of black people who know our painful history, does not correct the wrongs of the past by, number one, recognizing the king of Amahlubi and recognizing the nation of Amahlubi. And this is critical because we've got different nations in our country, whether it's Bavenda, it is Bapedi, it is Amampondo, Amampondo, Amazulu, Amatosa. So what is important is that all of the nations that were there before the country being colonized, they need to be restored to how they were before in terms of being recognized by the government. That now then informs our identity and the character as a country, because what these people who came to colonize us tried to do, they tried to destroy, they tried to divide, they tried to make us as people forget who we are. So the point of departure must always be to recognize Amahlubi, to ensure that there is justice in terms of the identity and the character of the citizens. Now, also, when it comes to the question of the rural economy, we're of the view as a party that there needs to be a farming revolution whereby wherever that we go, wherever that there's Arab land, people must farm. Because when we were growing up, we grew up having igadi namasimi, whereby the food that we ate was predominantly coming from the interventions that we had in our own farms. Now, that is why the food was cheaper back then, because we were able to live off what we had. Now, currently, the food prices are very high. So the point of departure is to make sure that every place that we have in our country, people must farm. The second issue is that we need to make amakumkani, to be the strategic places of development, because we find that in some areas there is a problem whereby a councillor wants to elevate himself to be the same status as Inkosi, whereas Inkosi is not elected, it does not serve a term of 5 years. Therefore, to resolve all of that issue, for us, we are viewing that Inkosi, Amakomkulu, must be the strategic place of development in the rural areas, to make sure that there's no development that happens in an area under the jurisdiction of Inkosi, and you find that Inkosi was not part and parcel of the decision-making and contributing on what needs to be done for the betterment of the lives of the people in that area.
Honorable Zungula, I think you've raised a lot of important issues yesterday in your debate, and we are looking forward to hearing the President respond to some of those issues. But let me thank you very much for making this time to join us this day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable Zungula, the leader of the African Transformation Movement, who made his contribution to the debate yesterday, raising very interesting points there. But we are inching closer to the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address at 2 p.m., where members of political parties will continue to comment and raise their questions on matters addressed in the President's speech. So you need to stay tuned to Parliament TV as we bring you more interviews and more reactions to the State of the Nation address.
What the President did during his address phase of her life as a wife, a mother, and a provider. Over the past decade, she has watched in growing horror as the dream of her childhood has been betrayed. Tinswalo's social consciousness started to develop during high school, as she watched the ANC elevate a man accused of corruption and rape to the highest office in the land. She grew steadily more disillusioned when she found out that 246 million rand of public money was used to build a fire pool and a chicken coop at the president's home in Nkandla, even as many people around her fell deeper and deeper into poverty. And she watched as the ANC members of this House protected him. In 2015, she graduated from a TVET college. A year later, Tinswalo realized that she was not alone in her growing unease about the future. In 2016, she watched as many voters abandoned the ANCs in major cities. And she too started to think about changing her vote at the next election.
You are still watching Parliament TV. We continue our build-up to the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address. With me now in studio is the parliamentary leader of the National Freedom Party, the NFP, Honorable Sheikh Imam. Honorable Imam, thank you and welcome to Parliament TV.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure.
The President gave his address last Thursday, and yesterday members of different parties, including the ruling party, gave their assessment as they debated the speech. Most members of the opposition painted a picture or an alternative picture of a Tinswalo that the President referred to. What's your assessment of the President's speech?
Well, first of all, as anticipated, the ruling party, the ANC, will come out in defense of what has happened over the last 30 years, talking about their successes, as expected. Opposition parties will come out attacking, insulting, finding faults, weaknesses. So that was expected. What I did not see is solutions and how do we go forward after 30 years of governance with the current structure in place.
Well, the President said in the next 2 years they will be recruiting 20,000 police officers to deal with crime, for instance. There will be increasing presence in the borders to make sure that they arrest the issue of illegal immigrants floating in and coming into the country illegally. Are those not some of the solutions?
I think the President seems to, at some stage, appear to be in another planet. You know, recruiting more and more police officers is not the solution to the high levels of crime in the country. We need to establish what are the root causes of the crime. Socioeconomic conditions, high unemployment rate, the availability of drugs, gangsterism, the criminal justice system. People get arrested today, they're out on bail within an hour or two, unscrupulous lawyers. So there's a whole host of reasons why we have such a high level of crime in the country. Not forgetting, last year, 91,000 children gave birth to children. 88,000 of those children, coincidentally, are still at school. Now, if you look at the latest stats, I think over a 6-month period, over 1,000 men have tested positive for HIV and AIDS in the country. Now, remember, South Africa has a population increase of at least over 1 million a year. What are we doing in terms of economic growth to absorb them into the society? Nothing. Now, police officers, and many of them that you're recruiting are dying. Others are leaving the force. That's because we are expecting the police officers to go and deal with crime after the crime is committed. But the responsibility of police officers is to prevent a crime from being committed. Now, can a police officer, even if you recruited another 20 or 30 or 40,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, can they go and guard every home, each man and woman? They can't. Every area that we've been to, every province, the commissioners are highlighting the same problems. The taverns are open 24 hours. The liquor board is giving them licenses till 2 o'clock. Local authorities, that's we politicians, are making it 24 hours. This is where most of your crime is coming from. Repeat offenders, causes of the high levels of crime in the country, the availability of firearms.
But we have the best constitution, and it makes provision for these kind of things to happen. It makes provision for children to be allowed to consent to sexual relations at the age of 16. It makes provision for taverns to open during those hours and be able to operate in those hours. And we have the best constitutions. And as a member of parliament, you are one of the custodians of the constitution. So what's the solution?
I have raised repeatedly that it is time to have a relook at the constitution and make necessary amendments. But let's ask ourselves, where is this coming from? This is the ideology of democracy that has been imposed on us. So we have democratic rights, we have constitutional rights, and this is what's giving rise to what is happening in countries all over the world. South Africa is a very young democracy. Where is our culture? Where is our tradition? Where is our religion? It has no place in society. And this is what those that impose democracy on us brought, this ideology of vision of rights for each and every one. This is what they've imposed on us. If you remember many years ago, when the colonialists came to this country, there was no religion, not even in the whole of Africa. It was not being practiced. What were we practicing? The religion, culture, tradition of our own beliefs. And then they brought in the issue of dividing us through different religious groupings, brought in these democratic rights, that even a child today has a right that a parent can't even discipline. Where are we heading to? So I think what we need to do is go back to our roots, to our culture, our tradition.
Are you suggesting we abandon the constitution, we abandon democracy and go back to our traditions? How do we do that?
I think what I'm saying is, we have come 30 years applying the constitution.
Yeah.
And what we find today is that we are not progressive by nature. In fact, we are regressing.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? Let's go back to the constitution and look at where the weaknesses are. Let's amend that constitution. I'll give you a good example. Why is the right of a criminal more important than the rights of the victims? That is what we are applying in the country at the moment.
You, and I'm saying you, referring to you as a member of parliament, collectively failed to resolve a very emotive issue that some of the movements and political parties were formed on the basis of getting land back. Parliament failed to resolve that issue. Do you think we are in a position where we can amend the constitution for any other matter when we failed on this big issue of
First
land?
of all, let me say this. There was no need to even amend the constitution, which is what we did in section 25, because the constitution does provide for expropriation without compensation.
Okay.
It is the failure of government and the respective departments to implement that timelessly. And that is why I have asked the question time and time again. What is the responsibility of politicians, portfolio committees who have a responsibility of conducting oversight? What do? We go out, we spend millions of rands, live in 5-star hotels, we find the weaknesses, the challenges on the ground, we come back, we adopt the report, throw it into the bin. That's it. 6 months later, you go back again. Where is the consequences for that? Nowhere to be found. But let's look at the issue of land right now as I speak to you. We talk about the inequalities that we inherit and being one of the most unequal societies in the world, right? Yeah. What stops government, all of us, not only the ruling party, everybody wherever they govern, in whichever local authority, of identifying the available land in that community, identifying the people that live there in that community who do not have homes and land, subdividing the available land and giving to each and every family, including a single parent family, give their dignity and identity back to them by just giving them, subdividing and giving them a piece of land. You don't have to be in a hurry to get them the water, sanitation and electricity. You can tell them, this year I'm going to provide water and sanitation to 1,000 homes, next year to another 500, the following year to 1,000. They will be happy. What stops us right now? You don't need no constitution, you need nothing for that. It's within the mandate and the authority of those local authorities and the municipalities.
Yeah.
We will not do it because we want the poorest of the poor people to be vulnerable so that they will come back and support us, because when you give them everything, they don't need you.
And that speaks to the question of oversight as well. I have to ask you this question, as I asked most of the parties represented in Parliament. We are going towards election this year, and the challenge that we've had, it was even raised by the state capture report, the issue of oversight. And political parties, opposition parties will come out to say, well, the ANC is defending itself even within committees. Now, should it happen that as we go into elections, we come out with a coalition government, is Parliament, are the laws and the rules of Parliament sufficient to usher in a coalition government and a coalition parliament? Is it going to work?
First of all, let me tell you, South Africa is not ready for coalition governments. Every coalition government that we currently have at local level has collapsed. The focus on coalition governments currently is not on delivering services to the people or social upliftment of our people, but it is a race for power, control and positions and the financial resources. And that is what prompted me to say to the Deputy President when I attended those coalition talks, separate politics from administration. No politician should have anything to do with the appointment or employment of anybody. Let an independent body be appointed from the private sector that will interview people, do their due diligence, do the integrity checks and things, and appoint people based on merit. Number two, I said, don't allow any politician to have anything to do with procurement. Our job is to conduct oversight. But how can you be the referee and the player and expect success? That is the reason why we have a problem. The country, if you saw the latest report this morning, 5.19 billion rand is what the Auditor General is saying has been lost because you didn't get value for money. When an item that cost 1 rand, you're paying 100 rand for. Goods were never delivered but ordered and paid for. And that was only 170 of the 250 municipalities that were checked. Now, if you take that away, and I have, including this morning on the Standing Committee on Appropriation, raised with Treasury the same thing.
Yeah.
Why can't there be more transparency to ensure that when you award these tenders monthly, who is the company, who's the directors, what is the value, what is the itemized billing? So you could see whether an item that costs 10 rand, you're paying 10 rand.
Yep.
It won't be done. Can I tell you why? Because every political party, wherever they govern, are sustaining themselves through these corrupt means. And I can tell you that even in this election that's coming up, I would love one political party in the entire National Assembly to tell me that the funding that they're using for this election campaign has not come from unlawful means.
Okay, we hope to hear where your party get the means. But let me thank you very much for making time to talk to us. I know you will be debating this morning, and we are looking forward to hear what your debate will be about and the response to the debate by the President tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was the parliamentary leader of the NFP, Honorable Sheikh Imam, talking to us, reflecting on the State of the Nation address debate and preparing himself to contribute to the debate later this afternoon. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this with more.
What I would like to raise with you, Mr. President, in the limited time I have, is the matter that you had last year instructed Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana to attend to, which is the matter of the SATBVC state pensioners. Your public instruction created a legitimate expectation within the community of thousands upon thousands of ex-civil servants and their families that their complaints will at long last be attended to. Mr. President, a year has lapsed and nothing has happened to fulfill your instruction. Aside from a meeting I had with the Minister on the 22nd of March 2023, that created some expectation with the Pensioners Committee, nothing further happened. As you might be aware, the SATBVC pensioners have now resorted to a legal route to seek to effect your instruction, which will take time and resources. Yet National Treasurer, GEPF, and the PIC did not go to court to consult with anyone before they used pensioners' monies to bail out SOEs and funded BE transactions to the tune of billions of rands. I would therefore strongly recommend an alternative solution from your office, and that is that an independent body with chartered accountants and tax experts be mandated to handle the matter with subpoena powers to clear the House.
Welcome back. You are still watching Parliament TV. If you are just joining us, welcome to our coverage of the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation Address 2024. You cannot mention 2024 without reflecting on 30 years of democracy. In 1994, South Africans from all walks of life voted for the first time to bring a new democratic government into office, marking the beginning of a new era of a shared vision of a democratic, free, non-racial, and equal society. This was a momentous occasion, rather, that the world watched in awe and great anticipation, representing a far-reaching transition from a difficult past. As we approach April 2024, it will mark 30 years since the advent of democracy in South Africa and 12 years since the adoption of the National Development Plan 2030.
Indeed, this year will also mark the end of the term for the 6th administration of South Africa's democratic dispensation and the 7th general election and the beginning of the 7th democratic dispensation, all of which are significant. After the State of the Nation address delivered by the President and the debate which commenced yesterday, there seems to be a recognized need to take a step back and reflect on the journey so far, including the achievements and shortcomings as well as the roadmap towards 2030 and beyond. This is all in the pursuit of a better life for all South Africans of the country. You'll also remember that the 25-year review report produced by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation suggests that the South African government has not yet fully utilized the tools at its disposal, such as legislation, key legislation, policies and procurement systems to establish economic rights for historically disadvantaged individuals and undo the effects of apartheid. The report also highlights the challenges in reducing income inequality, asset ownership disparities, and reversing apartheid-era spatial planning.
And in addition to these challenges, South Africa has faced significant disruptions caused by global economic crisis, currency challenges, the COVID-19 pandemic, civil unrest, floods, and an ongoing energy crisis. All of this has been raised during the debate from various political corners, and we expect that members who are part of the debate today will also contribute to the review of the 30 years of democracy. Let's take a look back at some of the State of the Nation addresses which have taken place for over the last 30 years.
We must construct that people-centered society of freedom in such a manner that it guarantees the political liberties and the human rights of all our citizens.
Welcome back, and thank you very much for staying with us. You're still watching Parliament TV on DSTV channel 408. The State of the Nation address is one of the most important events in our political calendar. The debates which started yesterday have been obviously parties making their comments on the issues facing South Africa.
Indeed, last week Parliament TV brought you the full coverage of the State of the Nation address. And after the speech, we spoke to members to get their reactions of the President's address. And boy, oh boy, there have been like a lot of views.
Indeed.
Let's take a look back at some of what they had to say.
Well, the achievements that the President has highlighted are laudable, but you see there's a saying that you don't praise a fish for swimming. It is the role of government, especially a political party which has been in government for the last 30 years, to have done exactly what he said. But we still believe that it could have been done better. And why we say that, because the President himself has admitted there are lots of things that we still need to do. And that permeated his speech, still need to do. And the question we have to ask ourselves, is this political party that's leading government the right party to still do same old over the next 30 years? And the answer to that is no. I think there's time for change. It's time the ANC and the ruling party begin to realize that there are other partners that they should work with. If they come back with a sizable majority, work with in ensuring that there are checks and balances in government. Insofar as the issue of corruption is concerned, it's well and good to blame 10 years of corruption and what happened and who did what. But ask yourselves, you always look in the mirror and ask the person in the mirror, who was there during that time? It was not one individual, but it was the political party leadership that were directly or indirectly involved to allow this kind of thing to continue.
Well, firstly, for us, it was a campaign speech that went horribly wrong for the president. He tried to use the SONA to launch the ANC's election campaign. Hence, the speech was lacking in detail. In fact, he tried to give an account of what was done in the past 5 years. He actually sugarcoated it. They did not own up or take responsibility rather for the failures of their government and for the fact that South Africa finds itself in this quagmire primarily because of the failures and the mismanagement of the ANC, particularly of the economy. For example, they speak about load shedding as if it's something that fell as manna from heaven or that they inherited from elsewhere when they are responsible for that problem, and they still do not know how to resolve load shedding. All the time, his solution when it comes to dealing with load shedding has to do with privatizing energy. If you privatize energy, you lose your sovereignty and your independence, because those who supply you with energy can manipulate your economy anytime and create instability by manipulating the supply of energy. That's all they need to do to change government. The second issue has to do with the fact that he made a laundry list of promises that he has made many times before. I felt like I was listening to President Zuma at one point. Another point I felt like was listening to former President Thabo Mbeki. Remember, he had apex priorities. Remember, there were 24. Same thing. But the problem is no implementation. The other problem is he mentions random programs, infrastructure. So we are going to build a bridge. But if it's an infrastructure-led growth strategy, you must tell us how that is going to help us to reduce unemployment, help us to eradicate poverty in our country. How are we going to make sure that we create jobs via that strategy? Firstly, you're asking me for the UDM manifesto, which is nice. What must change is actually we understand what the problems of the country are. You need to actually make sure that you deal with the socio-economic challenges facing the country. That way you must be clear about your growth strategy, how it's going to be anchored, the issues of energy constraints which have been facing the country for a long time would have to be addressed, because you can't grow the economy without addressing that. The issue of port efficiency, by the way, if you go back and you read Asgisa, you will see they were talking about the port efficiency story. But more than 20 years later, we're sitting in a worse off position than we were before. So you need to address all the challenges facing the country, because if you deal with socio-economic issues, then you'll be able to a large extent to address opportunistic crime incidents that take place, violent crimes such as cash and tides and heist. You have hardcore criminals, obviously, and others engage in crime out of desperation and because they're hungry. So you need to know exactly what kind of country and what your strategy when it comes to geostrategic issues is going to be, and whether your strategy will help you to address your economic needs in the country. There must be a balance between the two, and not be Father Christmas. That includes the African continent.
You are still watching Parliament TV, and this is the second day of the State of the Nation Address debate, which will take place at 2 p.m. The debate is scheduled to end at 5 p.m. and there are 27 speakers on the speakers list, including the chief whip of the NCOP, the Premier of the Eastern Cape, the Chief Whip of the Opposition, the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, the President of SALGA, amongst other members of the National Assembly and the NCOP.
Indeed, that's a very long list, comprehensive list of members who are still supposed to be closing this debate, and those are the big names on that speakers list. Besides the hot topics which are dominating the news cycle, as we have seen since the SONA last week, the President's speech was full of numbers and statistics to portray the state of our nation. Government News published an article called SONA in Numbers, and it gives a very clear picture of where we have grown and where we have regressed as a country.
Indeed. I was listening just to Honorable Nkwankwa and Honorable Singh reacting to the president's speech, and it left me wondering a bit, where he says at some stage it felt like he was listening to President Mbeki, and then it felt like he was listening to President Zuma, and now it's President Ramaphosa. So he started wondering what's going on and asked the question if it's a problem of implementation that the ANC is dealing with. But in my mind also, I'm thinking perhaps it's consistency.
It is consistency. That is exactly what I was going to say, because if we look at the trajectory, the policy trajectory from the Reconstruction and Development Program to where we are right now, these policy constructs really have their origins in the Freedom Charter.
Yeah.
And if we look at what is contained in the Freedom Charter, access to housing, issues of, freedom of your, association, freedom of religious and political association, access to the mainstream economy, land ownership, property ownership, and all of that. So there is a consistent trajectory in relation to the policy focus, but the how, if we look at what instruments and constructs, policy constructs, have actually dominated at specific points in time in the last 30 years of our democracy, that may have changed, but at the center of it, it is all rooted and anchored in advancing transformation.
And a sore thumb for the ANC and the ruling party, or the government in general, has been for the past few years the issue of electricity.
Absolutely.
I've listened to some of the reactions, someone saying the government doesn't seem to have a real program to deal with electricity. You listen to the president, he will give clear guidelines in terms of how the ANC and the government is going to be dealing with the issues of electricity in the next few years. But the critics, and these being members of opposition, criticize the government for not speaking in one voice in this matter. How do you think the government should be communicating the issue of electricity? We have the Ministry of Electricity, we have the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and then we also have the presidency speaking on the same issue.
Yeah. No, that's a very important question, Shitla. I think what is important to recognize is that the president gives an overarching perspective.
Yeah.
He will give it to us in broad strokes. And there will be very specific things that the president will obviously be able to report on. When it comes to the specific interventions, after the budget has been delivered, the budget speech, we will now get into the budget vote process, where Parliament is dealing with the allocation of resources towards the project, the program of action for the year ahead.
Yeah.
And that is where we can expect to hear that kind of detail. And I think a lot of times there is this expectation that the president has about an hour and a half, sometimes two, or just over 2 hours, to take us through a wide range of policy areas and report back. So he must both report back on some of the issues that the commitments and undertakings that were made in last year's SONA, and he must give us the plan for the year ahead. But all of this, he cannot, otherwise we'll be here for a whole day.
Yeah.
And that kind of detail you can only get in the line departments. And yes, it's true that, South Africans are, and of course our political parties must play their role. Their role is in terms of safeguarding our democracy. They must ask questions.
Yeah.
They must ask questions, and they must critically analyze the president's speech. And as what has been happening now in the last 2 days, this is day 2 of the SONA debate, they must ask critical questions. And the issue of load shedding has been an issue of major concerns, concern for a lot of South Africans. And of course, we know that if in order for the economy to grow, we need stable electricity supply. We need stability within the energy sector, and because it also impacts on businesses growing. And a lot of, as we know, many businesses have been negatively affected, have had to close down due to the fact that load shedding has impacted, their functioning. But I think it's important to draw that distinction, that it's important. The president will give it to us in broad strokes. He will give us an overarching perspective, and he speaks still within the context of the National Development Plan. He speaks within the context of the medium-term strategic framework and the 7 priorities. And every year the president will speak to key aspects of the medium-term strategic framework, those 7 priorities. And he will not be able to give us all the details, but we can expect to get that detail during the budget vote process. But the other point that I want to make, which is also very, very important, is that you were talking about how the communication aspect of it. Yeah. There is a need, for government to communicate more. There is a need for ministers to communicate more, and there is a commitment. I mean, we've seen that as well. For example, last week Thursday, immediately after the president delivered his speech, there is a willingness to engage. And of course, we've had some ministers on the Parliament TV platform as well. And we will, of course, also have the Minister of Electricity, who's also going to share, perspectives around those issues. Because a lot of times when they're up there and they're giving their speeches, there's no opportunity to engage and ask questions. So this platform is specifically for that. So there will be an opportunity to do that.
And the president did indeed speak to some of the numbers. And one interesting statistic that he spoke to was the growth in the number of social grant recipients, or people who are benefiting from social assistance from government every month. And you look at this in contrast to the slow growth of the economy, which is not able to create as many jobs as one could expect, considering the number of people living in South Africa, with the population growth expected to be at least 1 million more people every year. I think these are some of very interesting statistics. But the question then is, how does government move towards balancing what critics say it's over-reliance on government, or creating a nanny state vis-a-vis creating employment for citizens? How does government get itself out of that?
That's also another very important issue to raise, Sisla, because obviously we must also bear in mind what was inherited in South Africa, the state of affairs as it was. I don't even want to start talking about the issue of land, the 1913 Land Act, which confined the majority of South Africans to about, 7% of the land mass in the country. Now, when it comes to access, if we're talking about spatial access, that's one aspect of it. They were confined. Africans and people of different races were confined to very specific areas where they could not move. So accessibility was a problem. Access to the resources of the state was a problem, and that is the history. That's history, right? So now, when we look at what, and you had a conversation with the Minister of Social Development yesterday, and she gave those statistics as well in terms of what the social services package that is available, particularly in terms of the grants that are available. Where we are right now as a country, we've inherited a country of people who lived in abject poverty. These grants are a mechanism and a source of both poverty alleviation in the short term, but if we're talking about poverty reduction in the long term, that is where inclusive economic growth becomes quite critical. And some of the issues that have been raised, of course, restructuring the economy is a top priority, and that's where if we're looking at reassessing this within the context of South Africa as a developmental state, that is about transforming the state using both, advancing transformation, socio-economic transformation, obviously through industrialization and, creating an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, right? And we've seen also, Shihla, coming back to the numbers, coming to the issue of black industrialists, the President also spoke about the huge number, that number is going up, of young black industrialists who government is actually providing, has given grants to, providing support to, and that is part and parcel of systematically. Yes, it's not, the wheel is not turning as fast as we want it to turn, but we can see that there are, there is obviously movement in the right direction. So when it comes to balancing that, while we wait for the process to unfold of restructuring the economy, addressing issues of concentration, addressing issues of monopolies and oligopolies, there are people who do not have jobs at the moment.
Yeah.
And within that context of a developmental state, it is the responsibility of the state to both look after those who cannot look after themselves, and secondly, while it works on implementing mechanisms, to open up the economy and to bring more people, of those who are previously disadvantaged, into the mainstream economy. And of course, coming back to the issue of the President's investment summits, this is also in terms of the numbers. The President announced that that about an amount of 1.5 trillion has been raised. That's in terms of the commitments. And so far through the investment summits, about 500 billion new investment commitments were raised through the investment conferences. And as I said earlier, I spoke about the black ownership in mining as well. We have that percentage is sitting at about 39% as compared to the 2% prior to 2004.
No, quite interesting numbers. And if you look at issue of unemployment and job creation, and you look at this especially in relation to the population growth, and I think that's the element that we usually forget when we deal with the issue of unemployment.
Absolutely.
If you have a growth of 1 million people a year, and you still have high numbers of people who are unemployed, then the job creation will have to happen at a very high speed. And
Absolutely.
This is usually not possible because of the slow rate at which the economy is growing. But there are very interesting statistics that the President talks to there. And he says there are more than 1.7 million work and livelihood opportunities created through the expanded public works program.
Yes.
It may sound very little, but for someone who's sitting at home without a job, to find yourself in this particular program that brings food to your table, it's quite something.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important once again to emphasize that the President gives the state of the nation in broad strokes.
Yeah.
The detail of it, obviously, next, what's up, it's the speech, the budget speech, and then the budget vote process. After that, simultaneously, provinces will begin to deliver, premiers will begin to deliver their State of the Province addresses.
Yeah.
We'll get even more detail there. You borrow down to the local sphere as well. We'll get even more further detail, the kind of detail that South Africans, that ordinary South Africans sitting across the country in specific districts and localities would expect. With that said, we do stay tuned with Parliament TV as we build up to the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address.
Okay.
One thing that is important is that there are two sources of knowledge, is experience and studying a subject. Now, if you don't do both, anything you say is an imagination. I can assure you that you don't study, you don't experience, you don't know what you're talking about. Now, let me start by reminding beneficiaries of apartheid, denialists, and apologists on what we've been dealing with over the past 30 years. Following the work of the architect, Dr. Malan, when consolidating apartheid government, the apartheid master artisan, Hendrik Verwoerd, said, "We are building a system with deep roots that no future government will ever undo." Many people who criticize our government, including some in this parliament, argue that we must have done everything within 30 years never refer to atrocities of apartheid government. They conveniently forget that this country was colonized for 342 years, of which 46 were under apartheid. That is what we are swimming against, and we must continue swimming against that reality. It's a reality we must swim against, and throughout this period, the bastion of apartheid was the mining sector, which was the roughest in terms of implementing apartheid policies. I experienced it. I couldn't put my hand on a blasting certificate because it was reserved for a scheduled person, which was a term to tell a white person. Since South Africa attained democracy in 1994, the government efforts were aimed at achieving a dream of transformation, with a particular focus on ownership, on management, and procurement. Hence, we enacted the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act in 2002 and introduced the Mining Charter in 2004.
Welcome back. You are still watching Parliament TV, and we are building up to the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address. We've seen what went down yesterday, and we believe and hope to see more this afternoon in just about 30 minutes when the debate resumes. But joining me now in studio is the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance, Ms. Warube. Ma'am, welcome to Parliament TV.
Thank you, and it's good to be here.
Thank you. The President delivered his State of the Nation address last week, and there were reactions to his speech. And yesterday, members of Parliament started debating the SONA, and the leader of the opposition, the Democratic Alliance, stood up, and he gave an alternative story of the Dintswalo, or the picture of Dintswalo that the President painted. What's your impression of Dintswalo?
Look, I mean, it's very important to never minimize the strides that South Africa's democracy has made, and how over the past 30 years there has been some significant improvements in the lives of people. And so I think what the President was obviously trying to demonstrate by the Dintswalo story is that there are pockets of excellence in South Africa. And of course there are. But at the end of the day, we also must never forget that this is the story of Dintswalo is the exception and it's not the rule. And that way too many young people in South Africa can't tell that very same story. And that, in fact, 7 out of 10 young people, as we speak today, are without work. 30 million South Africans today are living in poverty, where they are skipping a meal a day. And so these are the realities, and I think that the criticism that has been leveled against the President has been around the fact that you paint this as though it is the reality of millions of South Africans, when in fact it is not. It is something that is worth celebrating, but there is a significant amount of people who can't recognize the world that you painted on Thursday. And it's those stories, I think, that people sought to bring across. And it's certainly going to be those stories of people around the country, real people, that I certainly will be speaking to this afternoon.
The National Planning Commission says we are looking at the President's speech and the challenges that South Africa faces in binary terms. They say with growth, with excellence, with implementation of policies, and with success generally comes failures as well. When you grow the economy, for instance, a lot of people have jobs, they now have means to buy cars. And now the road is no longer enough for everyone to drive in. Now there are potholes and so on. So they are saying our criticism is looking at things in binary terms. What's your impression of that?
I don't think that's entirely fair. I think the criticism is born from people's frustrations. I think the criticism is born from people's pain, and I think we must be very careful not to diminish that. And so I think, yes, of course, and I think that nobody is trying to also diminish the opposite, right? Where there are people and there are significant changes that have been made. And nobody can argue that South Africa is not in a better place today than it was pre-1994. Certainly, we are in a significantly better place. In fact, because by advent of our constitutional democracy, we are in a significantly better place in South Africa today. But we then must also ask ourselves, there was certainly a 10-year trajectory that happened, and then we reversed the gains of that were built in the first 10 years of our democracy. If you look at all the indicators, independent indicators, whether you're looking at job creation, corruption statistics, the census that was released quite recently last year or the year before, demonstrating that 2 million households in South Africa go without a meal a day. Those things, South Africa is not a poor country. The people of South Africa should not be going hungry. And it's a crime that they are. And so I think it's important to reflect that this has gone horribly wrong. There's something about the fact that South Africa's economy is not growing, and it's not growing at the level that it should, so that it can absorb people, put people into jobs, so that they can live lives of dignity, so that people are not just expectant for a 350 SRD grant from the government, that people are living lives that they can be proud of and looking after their families. Those are things that are important. And so I think what really, for me, I think what I would really like to see as the president prepares his response for tomorrow is that perhaps a more honest reflection to say, of course, you know, this is what we strive for, but this is not where we are right now.
You are not only the opposition party, you are also a governing party in the Western Cape, and some of these challenges that South Africans are complaining about are also happening here in the Western Cape. What do you think can be done, particularly for the Western Cape, for instance?
I think any political party, or at least any government that claims they are perfect at what they do is not telling the truth, because as you indicated, the more sort of progress you make, then the more glaring the needs become. And so I think it would be naive and it would be dishonest for us to simply claim, oh, well, you know, here in the Western Cape everything is perfect. There are many people here in the Western Cape who are expecting more from us, right? And so, of course, when one looks at independent indicators around the country, around service delivery, around the management of public funds, of course, you know, the Western Cape is lauded as doing as well as it can. When one looks at the unemployment statistics in the Western Cape, much lower than in the rest of the country, but there's still so much more to be done.
The highest levels of hijackings are happening in the Western Cape.
Absolutely, and these are the things that I'm saying, that we need to focus on. It would be dishonest to simply say, because we are doing well on this level, then we are now done. The work of governing is never done, and no government should ever have the hubris to think that they have. And so there are many people in the Western Cape who are wanting more, who are wanting housing, who are wanting to be safe in the streets, who are wanting better public transport. And these are the things that the province is working very hard to say, we would like national government to delegate some of these responsibilities to the province so that we can deliver, we can make sure that a government is closest to its people. That's why you would have heard the Western Cape government petitioning government to say, can we have control over policing? Because clearly the nationalized strategy of policing is not working for the Western Cape. Gangsterism is at an all-time high. We are dealing with violent crimes in our communities, and something needs to change. And so I think that, of course, these are the challenges, but here is an opportunity. We've got to be creative in the way in which we do government. And we cannot keep doing the same things that we've been doing over the past 30 years. We've got to shift and see what works and what will work better. Because ultimately, the people of South Africa don't have time.
You are receiving a lot of criticism for that particular one, wanting more powers for the Western Cape to be able to control or police crime and so on and so on. And some are referring to you, not as a person, as a political party, as apartheid apologists who are nostalgic of the Bantustans.
I think that's deeply unfortunate. The reality here is that, as I've made the example about policing, we have a unique challenge in South Africa. There are 3 of the most violent areas are in this province.
Yeah.
And so if you're a provincial government, you can't simply go to communities and tell them, well, this is a national government competency, there's nothing we can do for you.
Yeah.
Because people are going to look at you and ask you, what are you doing about it? I live in Delft, what are you doing about it? I live in Manenberg, what are you doing about it? I live in Mitchell's Plain, and all I hear is gunshots, what are you doing about it? And that's why the Western Cape has had to say, look, perhaps some of the things that we can do is allow to have the police powers devolve to the province, so that we can say, right, how do we police and create a policing service that is closest to the people? How do we create a public transport system that is closest to the people? Yep. It's deeply unfortunate to create the impression that wanting more powers to a competent province that has demonstrated that it can deliver is somehow trying to cessate it from the rest of the country. Okay. I think it's trying different governance models to say, how do we best cater to the people who expect us to do better? For us to keep doing the same thing for 30 years is not going to get us the results that we need. Okay. We've got to be creative.
The President SONA was the last for this 6th term of Parliament. Mm-hmm. And I was attending the summit, the Oversight Summit 2 weeks ago, where you were facilitating some of the discussions there. And a question was raised as to whether the laws and the rules that govern Parliament at the moment are sufficient enough to usher in a coalition government if we were to have one. Mm-hmm. I just want to get your impression or your perspective on that question.
Yeah, I think, so maybe some people at home may not be aware, but one of the things that I have done in this past term is introduce legislation that seeks to regulate coalition governments. I think a lot of South Africans may be turned off on coalition governments because of the instability that they've seen in many parts of the country, in some metros around the country. Yep. And it's important and it's incumbent on us as lawmakers to ask ourselves, how do we better respond to the challenges facing the people that we aim to serve? And if the issue is around, we are happy to have coalition governments, but they are unstable, then as lawmakers, we need to ask ourselves, how do we fix that? And that's part of the reason why I have proposed these private members' bills, which I'm hoping they'll serve before the end of the term. And I'm hoping they can have multi-party support, because I think regardless of where you sit politically, I think there's the recognition that South Africa is headed towards some kind of coalition government at some point, whether it's at a local level, whether it's at a provincial level or a national level. And so it's important that we look at how do we stabilize these governments? How do we insulate them from political instability? How do we insulate the public service from the political instability? Yeah. How do we protect the DGs, the officials in departments from being shuffled around when politicians change? Because it's those people who will make sure that service delivery continues. And so that is a very, very big priority of ours, and we're really hoping that we can get multi-party support
to keep the consistency. Yes. We're also going into elections this year. I have to ask you this question. I know it's unfair, but I have to ask you. The Minister of International Relations yesterday hit very hard on the Democratic Alliance, accusing you of flip-flopping when it comes to your international relations policy. She referred specifically to your stance on the conflict in Ukraine. So when Ukraine was under attack, the leader of the opposition mobilized and even went to Ukraine to offer support. But on the other hand, when Gaza is invaded the same way by Israel, the DA seemed to have a different stance. What's your response to that?
Look, it's not a different. I mean, obviously, you'll have different views and a different position on different countries, right? The Ukraine issue there's a different set of circumstances. When you look at the war in the Middle East, I mean, this has been almost a century in the making. As many people have been at pains to point out, this conflict didn't start in October 2022, 2023. It started a long time ago. And so consistently, the DA has been at pains to explain that ours is a two-state solution. In fact, interestingly, the South African government's position is one of a two-state solution. So it is in line with the UN position on the very matter. to say that we want two separate states that are able to self-govern, that are able to protect their citizens. We want to make sure that the guns are silenced. We want to make sure that no children and no civilians are fodder in this kind of war. And we're expecting, you know, the kind of working together that must happen so that these two nations can find peace. And I don't think it's fair to simply say, well, you know, your position is a flip-flop. I think anybody you will hear that we have consistently led with a two-state solution in accordance to what the United Nations and indeed the South African government has called for in the past. And so we are resolute on that. We think that, you know, riling up, you know, in a time of war, it's important to still create dialogue. In a time of war, it's important to be able to still broker peace. And that's part of the reason why we've never supported, for instance, chasing away the Israeli ambassador from South Africa. That's why we've never been in favor of, you know, shutting down all trade with countries. We think that when you're still opening dialogue, that's when you've got an opportunity to broker peace. Because I think every single person, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli, I think the people on the ground in particular want peace. They want to be able to protect their families and live in peace in a country where it's self-determined by them. And so I think we must not be blinded by that. And we mustn't allow populism to stretch it to opposite parts of this argument. We must consistently be aware that it is people's lives on the line.
Chief Whip of the DA, let me thank you very much and wish you the best on your debate this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance, Honorable Kwarobe. We are inching closer to the second day of the 2 days of the debate on the State of the Nation address at 2 p.m., where members of political parties will continue to comment and raise questions on matters addressed in the President's speech, rather. So stay tuned to Parliament TV. Thank you.
On this 30-year milestone of our constitutional democracy, we must bear in mind what we have inherited. We inherited a system that had inflicted far-reaching damage and oppression to millions of South Africans on the basis of race. We must therefore observe this 30-year milestone in the context of the progress made as a result of our rights-based agenda, which has been put in motion by our constitutional democracy under the ANC. These rights collectively represent our departure from a painful, oppressive, and discriminatory past, as we lean in towards creating a new South Africa from the ruinous past of colonialism and apartheid. During this first 30 years of our democracy, Parliament had to deal with laws that oppressed our fairness and equality. We have repealed that oppressive and discriminatory apartheid laws and enacted laws to overhaul the functioning of the broader state machinery. These actions have helped to solidify our democracy and assisted us to make great strides towards realizing our country's democratic goals. Furthermore, the efficacy of parliamentary business, particularly through the committees and debates in applying procedural processes and protocols, particularly as outlined in the Constitution and in the rules of both houses, have significantly improved throughout the years. Though through plenary discussions, questions, motions, and resolutions, members of Parliament continue to actively and robustly participate in policy debates while unpacking matters of material importance of the nation. Our improved coordination with the executive has also ensured the attendance of ministers in the sitting of both houses when required, leading to increase in executive responses to questions for oral and written reply.
Thank you very much, President, for a comprehensive report to the people of South Africa on the achievements of the 6th administration, while also acknowledging the challenges which we are still addressing. Indeed, over the last few days, many Tinswalos have come forward to say what this democratic state has done for them to open up opportunities for a better life. Last year, I also joined the Premier of the Eastern Cape when we opened the state-of-the-art district hospital in the area called in Tabankulu, a hospital called Sipetu, state-of-the-art with state-of-the-art equipment. But also late last year, I joined MEC of Limpopo and the Premier to also unveil state-of-the-art equipment in a hospital where myself and Minister Mutsaledi worked many years in the area Kukune called St. Rita's Hospital, where the MEC and the Premier were unveiling state-of-the-art equipment such as CT scanners, advanced digital X-ray machines, mammographies, and all those also connected to an advanced digital system called the Picture Archiving and Communication System. Through that system, when you take pictures from X-ray, CT scans, you can transmit that even to the doctor's cell phone, so that they don't have to come and look at the picture. They can even be transmitted, and they can also be transmitted to specialist radiologists, even if they are overseas, so that they can be able to interpret and then be able to send to the doctor who's on the bedside, so that they can be guided in terms of what to do to intervene. So I'm stating this to indicate that indeed, we are marching forward. There are a number of other hospitals which were upgrading across the country. In Limpopo, Siloam Hospital, which has taken a long time, is currently under construction. In the Eastern Cape, Zitulele Hospital, Free State, Ditlhabeng Hospital, Premier of Mpumalanga, Witbank Hospital, we're also doing upgrading there. And there are a lot of others which I cannot mention here today because of time.
So the bells have started ringing to call members to the chamber for the second day of the debate on the State of the Nation address. But before we head to the House, we are joined by the Freedom Front Plus leader, Dr. Peter Groenewald, who participated in the debate yesterday. Good afternoon, Dr. Groenewald, and welcome to Parliament TV.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.
I have to ask you, the President delivered the SONA last week, and he made a lot of announcements in terms of what the government has done in the past 30 years. And he announced that one of the things they did in the past 2 years was to recruit over 20,000 police officers to deal with crime. What's your impression of the State of the Nation address?
Well, my first impression is you said the bells has just started ringing. Well, I think the bells has actually started ringing for the President as well. He referred to 20,000. It's not true. The previous year there was about 8,000 recruits with the police. He said that they're going for another 12, but they don't have the budget for that. But besides that, the problem is, let's go the previous year. For those 8,000 recruits, they didn't have enough instructors to give proper training for those policemen and women. So that's part of the problem. They're not well trained. It's no use just increasing the numbers. You must ensure the quality of policing.
The debate started yesterday in the House, and I think one of the first few on the list was Minister Mantashe, who accused you, he referred to the Freedom Front Plus, he referred to the DA and other parties. He accused you of being apartheid apologists who are nostalgic of the past and have nothing to contribute in the future of South Africa. How do you respond to such accusations?
Well, if you go and look at the SONA of last year, 2023, I said it's quite clear that part of the strategy of the ANC in the election campaigns is going to be they're going to focus on apartheid, they're going to focus on race, and they're going to focus on land. So that's what he's saying, or that is what he said yesterday. But it's not true. And let me give you an example. The President, when he had a meeting with us as leaders, he said 20 years ago, Eskom was seen as one of the best electricity utilities in the world. Now, who was in government? The ANC destroyed it. Now he wants to go back to apartheid. Apartheid is dead. It is more than 30 years ago. And, you know, even the former president, Zuma, at one stage said, we cannot blame apartheid anymore. I mean, even Julius Malema said that. Even other political analysts, and I'm talking about black analysts, said we cannot blame apartheid anymore. So this is a very poor excuse from Mantashe. In fact, I see it only as a smokescreen to hide his own incapabilities.
What are the practical solutions that you think were missing in the president's speech? Let's look at unemployment. Let's look at the growth of the economy. Let's look at issues of crime. Let's look at healthcare. What was missing?
Well, everything is missing, because the president, and I predicted it, that he was going to have an election State of the Nation address. He actually misused the occasion to tell the people how wonderful the ANC governed the last 30 years. All those things. He will never mention it because it does not fit in the big picture of how good the ANC government has governed the last 30 years. I said yesterday, if you look at the economy, when he became the president, the economic growth rate in South Africa was 1.3%. Yet last year, it was only 0.9. So it subtracted under the leadership of the president.
Well, he'll tell you there was COVID-19 in the process, which affected the growth of the economy.
That's a very poor excuse, and I'll tell you why. Because I personally, as leader of the Freedom Front Plus, have said on numerous occasions during the COVID period that the regulations your ministers are putting in work is actually destroying the economy. It is destroying the livelihoods. The Freedom Front Plus even went to court on this irrational regulations from government side. If they have listened, it wouldn't have been such a severe impact on the economy. So it's a poor excuse.
It's about a minute before we go into the chamber, but I'm sitting with the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Groenewald. I have to ask you, Dr. Groenewald, we are going into the elections this year, and your party has done well. I mean, you look at the previous elections, you have been growing your electoral support on the ground. How do you envisage you would do in this coming election?
Well, we're busy with our election campaign, and the feedback is very, very positive. So we do hope that we can double again, like we did, the previous one we actually gained 250%. But at least if we can only double it, I would be very pleased. And it is quite possible, and as I said, the feedback we're receiving from people are very, very positive.
Are there specific policies or specific bills that you would want to propagate for as we go into the 7th Parliament?
Well, firstly, they're not going to complete processes on certain bills, because we must remember it's the end of the 6th Parliament. So it will have to go over to the 7th Parliament. And yes, the bills I would like to see is on, for instance, the labour legislation, because as far as I'm concerned, and we believe there must be a balance on the interests of the employers and the employees, a balance. But at this moment, what is also killing the economy is that the unions have too much power. So if I can refer to a specific piece of legislation that should be amended, it is the labour legislation in South Africa.
We will definitely be keeping tabs on those bills as you propose them. We are now heading straight to the House. The President has arrived and he is entering the chamber. Thank you, Dr. Groenewald, for joining us. We are crossing over to the chamber for the commencement of the joint sitting of the debate on the State of the Nation address. Thank you. Thank you.